Hi, it's Alex, and my article is an introduction to a bigger book of a whole bunch of articles put together, but I was only able to see the introduction, and it is called Identity, Place, and Space in Children's and Young Adult Literature. It is put together by Terry Daughtry and Dawn Thompson, and I have the article right in front of me. So, this article is the introduction is talking about this big conference where all of these articles were all put together and talked about, and how they had a big theme for the conference itself, and what the conference really meant to both the authors who wrote the articles, and what they viewed as an important sense of place in children's literature. And the place they are talking about is someone's home country or someone's reserve or just their identity that they had and that their grandparents had, or the great-grandparents, and how it is important for them to have literature that they can see this sense of place and not feel like they are casted out because they don't look like you, or they don't sound like you, or they don't eat like you. And so basically this whole introduction is talking about different books and how they broke it down. And some of them are like The Secret Garden or Harry Potter, and some very well-renowned ones. And there's also some just oral Native American literature that was written into literature, and then the colonization version of that. And so I am going to read out some of the parts that really spoke to me and discuss them. So I really liked how they decided the conference was going to be love where you learn. And they wanted the kids to be able to love where they learned, and they wanted the kids to be able to feel the sense of place in their school, and that their school not only cares about their education, but cares about where they came from and what place they could have been in if they didn't move. And their whole theme for their conference was the intersection of identity with the sense of place or space. And their timely topic of most of their papers were written on the indigeneity and place in stories for children, with a intertwining of the relationship to the child in the natural world and the fantastic spaces in the children's constructions on themselves. Their main idea was that they wanted the children, like I said, to know that their place had its roots, and whatever traditional Western hierarchy is irrelevant. They wanted these kids, especially the Native American kids, to know that where they came from was good. And they themselves to be able to be situated in their space and how their space inhabits itself. They wanted to make sure that the kids knew that the space they were in now is good, and that they are able to learn about where they came from, or learn about their cultural traditions. So I lost my spot. Oh my gosh. Okay. So starting with talking about European picture books, a few of the authors of the articles wrote about the interplay between sameness and differenceness, and locality and universality, and the region and the nation, and the nation and the European, national and the European. So this one is talking about how a lot of the Europeans stole stories and stole things and made it their own, and downplayed when people said that it wasn't theirs. And this happened a lot in a lot of the oral stories that were happening in India and in Asia and even in Africa, where they had these oral stories of their traditions and fun little stories about just camels, or like stories just about their hometown and where they lived in, but then the Europeans swooped them up and pushed them away, and then they were gone. And then they also looked at the historical and present workings of place and space to generate the individual and social identities in children's literature. Again, just proving my point that they wanted to make sure that the children knew that where they came from, they need to know about it. Melissa Lee Shuang-Ying considers the issue of cultural appropriation through talking about the Native American story collections based on the oral tales. 2 are by European writers, and 1 was by a Native American. And so the comparison that she found was that the assumptions of ideology of the Europeans affected the desires of the Native Americans and bridged the cultures, but made it primarily European. So meaning that they would have added a lot of their religion, and they would have added a lot of their stuff and downplayed whatever. So there was another author who wrote about a Canadian mixed blood Anishinaabe writer, Drew Hayden Taylor's Gothic vampire novel, The Night Wanderer. And this one shows how an exiled vampire creates a contemporary young adult ghost story, and it talks about how they had a whole bunch of struggles coming back in, and it used these First Nation picture books with her thesis. And in early childhood education contexts, it is because of the importance of the story and the shaping of identity. She argues for the increased and culturally aware use of literature when it comes from home culture. So basically, she is also proving this point where they need to continue talking about the home culture for the children. And another one is The Absolute True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, to consider the motivations for the implications of back to the Aboriginal youths, which is the whole point of this conference. And it kind of talks about whether or not they should leave their homes, their reserves, to improve the educational opportunities, because they don't get that same educational opportunity back at home, but they would in America, and they would if they were outside of their reserve. And that's not always a choice. Sometimes they aren't able to go back home. Sometimes their parents have said, oh, we're going to try to give you a better life. We're going to try to move out of the reserve and give you a better life. And they never get to see that home again. And they talked about a lot of that when they changed their last part of this book, was talking about the fantastics part of children's literature and place. And so this one is talking about India literature for children, and where India is figured as this nurturing motherland, and it is a place in which you have to return in order to shape your childhood identity, even when it is no longer your home. And so they created books about it, and they were talking a lot about how it is important for children of Indian descent to be able to know what their motherland was like in order to be able to fully grasp where they came from. Then they talked about the aesthetic and spiritual connections to the land with Anne of Green Gables, and several of other of her novels as well as the transformation of sickness to health, with talking about Montgomery's Jane of Lantern Hill and Dorothy Canfield Fisher's Understood of Betsy. Then they also talked about The Secret Garden and its connection to green space and the land itself, and talking about both land and health, tracing the home away from home narrative and another sense of place. Like in my book that I read, they were talking about how Daniel had to go to work with his mom and his dad, and they worked at a big corporate factory and they had to clean at night. And his parents would create these stories to make the night more fun. And so they created this home away from home where Daniel would sometimes have to go and spend the night. They also later talked about environmental issues in different land, as well as myth, legend, and faith tie into place as well in different children's novels. And then finally, they're talking mostly about fantasy when they're talking about Neverland and the representation of self-esteem in the characters of Peter Pan and Wendy, and of course not Tinkerbell, she's a fairy, but then they also finally talk about Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone and theories of identity in social and cultural space to show how the two different worlds of muggles and wizards and how these can be your home away from home, in a sense where these kids might think that they are the muggles, when in reality they are the same and they are equally as important. Wizards are equally as important as muggles. And I chose this one because it was extremely hard for me to find a children's lit peer-reviewed article online, but also because I thought it was really interesting. I'm talking about the culture and how a lot of these kids don't necessarily think that their home is a place that exists, is a place that they should feel comfortable they are a part of. And yeah. Also, sorry that my iPhone storage keeps on going full and these will be slightly choppy.